Welcome to Celestial Zodiac. Today we're talking about outer planet retrogrades and why they feel very different from the retrogrades most people are familiar with. One of the biggest misconceptions in astrology is that all retrogrades affect us in the same immediate, noticeable way. With inner planets like Mercury, Venus, and Mars, the effects are often personal and obvious. You feel them in daily life: communication issues, relationship shifts, motivation changes. Outer planet retrogrades don't work like that, and that's why many people assume they don't matter. Outer planet retrogrades usually don't feel personal at first because they don't disrupt day-to-day events. They don't interfere with schedules, conversations, or short-term decisions. Instead, they operate beneath the surface, gradually reshaping beliefs, identity, power dynamics, and internal frameworks over time. Their influence unfolds slowly, often outside of conscious awareness. Another reason they don't feel immediate is because outer planets retrograde every single year, and they remain retrograde for months at a time. There's no sudden shift in pace the way there is with inner planets. The change is subtle, cumulative, and internal. You're not meant to react to outer planet retrogrades. You're meant to develop through them. This is why people often say they didn't feel an outer planet retrograde at all, only to realize later that their worldview changed, their priorities shifted, or their sense of self evolved during that period. Outer planet retrogrades don't announce themselves with chaos. They reveal their impact in hindsight through growth, awareness, and long-term transformation rather than immediate events. To understand why outer planet retrogrades feel so different, it helps to look at what's happening astronomically, not just astrologically. Outer planets move much more slowly through the sky than the inner planets. Because they orbit far beyond Earth, it takes years, sometimes decades, for them to complete a single journey through the zodiac. As Earth moves along its faster orbit, it regularly overtakes these distant planets, creating the appearance that they are moving backward from our point of view. This apparent backward motion is what we call a retrograde, and for the outer planets it happens every year. Unlike Mercury, which retrogrades for a few weeks at a time, outer planets remain retrograde for months. Jupiter is retrograde for roughly 4 months each year. Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto spend close to half the year in retrograde motion. Because these retrogrades are long and expected, there is no sudden interruption or sharp energetic shift. The motion changes gradually, and the planet often moves back and forth over the same degrees for extended periods of time. This creates slow, repetitive exposure to the same themes rather than quick disruptions that demand immediate attention. In other words, outer planet retrogrades aren't sudden events. They're extended phases. Their influence builds quietly over time, reinforcing why their effects are subtle, internal, and cumulative rather than dramatic or immediate. One of the main reasons outer planet retrogrades are often ignored is because they don't create obvious disruptions in everyday life. Unlike inner planet retrogrades, they don't affect communication, schedules, or immediate decisions in ways that demand attention. There's no missed message, delayed flight, or sudden conflict to point to and say, "This is because of a retrograde." Outer planet retrogrades also operate below conscious awareness. They influence belief systems, identity, emotional conditioning, and internal power structures. Areas of life that tend to change gradually rather than all at once. Because these shifts happen internally, people often don't recognize them as they are occurring. Awareness usually comes later, once a perspective has shifted or an old framework no longer fits. Another reason these retrogrades go unnoticed is their duration. When a planet is retrograde for months at a time, the experience becomes part of the background rather than a noticeable event. There's no clear beginning or end that signals something is happening. The process unfolds slowly, blending into everyday life instead of standing apart from it. There's also a cultural bias toward visible cause and effect. People tend to notice astrology when something happens, not when something changes internally. Outer planet retrogrades don't announce themselves through events. They work quietly, reshaping how we think, respond, and relate to power, meaning, and reality over time. Because of this, outer planet retrogrades are often dismissed as unimportant, when in reality, they're responsible for some of the most significant long-term shifts a person experiences. Their influence isn't loud, it's foundational. To understand why outer planet retrogrades matter, we need to understand what each of these planets governs. Unlike the inner planets, which shape daily experiences, outer planets operate at the level of long-term development, collective themes, and deep internal frameworks. They don't influence what happens today, they influence who you become over time. Jupiter governs belief systems, meaning, growth, and the way we seek truth and purpose. It shapes philosophy, faith, ethics, education, and our sense of what is possible. Jupiter influences optimism, confidence, and the narratives we use to make sense of life. When Jupiter is active, we're expanding, intellectually, spiritually, or ideologically. Saturn governs structure, responsibility, authority, and limits. It rules discipline, accountability, boundaries, and the systems we rely on to function in the world. Saturn shapes our relationship to time, effort, and achievement, as well as our internal sense of authority. It shows where we mature, commit, and take responsibility, whether willingly or under pressure. Uranus governs change, disruption, individuality, and liberation. It rules innovation, rebellion, awakening, and the desire to break free from outdated structures. Uranus shapes authenticity, independence, and sudden shifts in perspective. It's the planet that challenges conformity and pushes evolution forward, often in unexpected ways. Neptune governs imagination, illusion, spirituality, and transcendence. It rules dreams, intuition, compassion, and the boundaries between reality and fantasy. Neptune shapes perception, sensitivity, and the way we dissolve ego structures in favor of something larger. It can inspire deep empathy and creativity, but it can also blur truth when clarity is lacking. Pluto governs power, transformation, and psychological depth. It rules death and rebirth processes, control dynamics, trauma, and the subconscious forces that shape behavior. Pluto exposes what has been hidden, suppressed, or denied, forcing profound change over time. Its influence is slow, intense, and irreversible. Once Pluto transforms something, there's no return to the old version. Together, these 5 planets don't describe surface-level experiences. They describe long-term growth, maturation, awakening, dissolution, and transformation. When they retrograde, these processes turn inward, not to stop development but to restructure it at its core. For the outer planets, retrograde motion is not a disruption. It's the core phase of their work. Because these planets govern long-term development rather than short-term events, their retrograde periods are when internal restructuring takes place. This is where beliefs, boundaries, identity, perception, and power dynamics are examined from the inside out. When an outer planet is direct, its themes tend to express outwardly through systems, institutions, social dynamics, and external circumstances. But when it turns retrograde, that energy withdraws from the external world and turns inward. The focus shifts from reacting to life to understanding it. Growth becomes internal, subtle, and often invisible to others, and sometimes even to ourselves. This is why outer planet retrogrades can feel quiet or uneventful on the surface. There's no immediate feedback loop. Instead, awareness develops slowly. Old assumptions loosen. Internal pressure builds around outdated beliefs or structures that no longer fit. You may not consciously recognize what's changing yet, but something fundamental is being reorganized beneath the surface. Retrograde motion gives the psyche time to integrate lessons that would be overwhelming if they arrived all at once. It allows for reflection, reassessment, and internal alignment before external change becomes visible. In this sense, outer planet retrogrades act like a long incubation period. The transformation is happening even if there's no obvious evidence yet. What makes this phase so important is that the changes formed during retrograde tend to last. When the planet eventually turns direct, the internal work that's been done begins to express outwardly in more concrete ways. Decisions shift. Boundaries change. Worldviews evolve. The retrograde phase is where the foundation is laid. The direct phase is where the results begin to show. Outer planet retrogrades don't demand action. They demand honesty, awareness, and patience. They ask us to sit with discomfort, question internal frameworks, and allow slow transformation to take place. This is why their influence is often only recognized in hindsight. Not because nothing happened, but because something profound was quietly rewritten. Emotionally and psychologically, outer planet retrogrades don't usually register as sudden feelings or dramatic shifts. Instead, they influence the internal landscape, the beliefs, assumptions, and emotional frameworks that quietly shape how we experience life. Their effects are subtle, gradual, and often recognized only after a perspective has changed. With Jupiter retrograde, emotional focus turns inward toward belief systems and meaning. Confidence may soften, certainty may be questioned, and long-held assumptions about purpose or truth may no longer feel as solid. Psychologically, this retrograde encourages internal reflection rather than external expansion, asking whether growth has been genuine or simply inherited from culture, education, or ideology. Saturn retrograde often brings an internal reckoning around responsibility, authority, and self-discipline. Emotionally, this can feel like pressure without a clear source. A sense that something needs to be restructured internally. Psychologically, Saturn retrograde exposes internalized rules, fears, and self-judgment, asking whether authority has been built from wisdom or obligation. With Uranus retrograde, emotional restlessness turns inward. The urge for freedom, authenticity, or change may not yet have an outlet, creating internal tension. Psychologically, this retrograde can feel like a quiet awakening. Old identities begin to loosen, and the need for personal truth grows stronger beneath the surface, even if no external changes have happened yet. Neptune retrograde often brings emotional clarity through disillusionment. Confusion may lift slowly, revealing where fantasy, denial, or projection has distorted perception. Psychologically, this retrograde heightens awareness of emotional boundaries, encouraging discernment between intuition and illusion, compassion and self-deception. With Pluto retrograde, emotional intensity turns inward. Power struggles, control issues, or unresolved psychological material may surface internally rather than through external conflict. Psychologically, Pluto retrograde initiates deep subconscious processing, confronting fears, attachments, or suppressed truths that must be acknowledged before real transformation can occur. Across all 5 planets, the emotional and psychological impact of retrograde is not about reaction. It's about integration. These cycles work quietly, reshaping inner foundations so that when external change eventually arrives, it's rooted in awareness rather than impulse. While outer planet retrogrades don't operate on a fast or personal timeline, the zodiac sign a planet retrogrades in still matters. The sign doesn't change what the planet is working on. It changes how the lesson is expressed and experienced internally. Think of the planet as the function and the sign as the style. Jupiter will always work with belief and meaning, Saturn with responsibility and structure, Uranus with liberation, Neptune with perception, and Pluto with transformation. The sign simply colors the process, shaping the tone, motivation, and psychological lens through which that work unfolds. For example, when an outer planet retrogrades in a fire sign, the internal work often centers on identity, purpose, confidence, and personal direction. There may be a quiet reassessment of motivation, courage, or belief in oneself. In earth signs, the focus turns towards stability, values, security, and long-term foundations, often prompting reflection on practical priorities and material reality. Air signs emphasize mental frameworks, communication patterns, and belief systems, while water signs bring emotional processing, intuition, memory, and subconscious material into focus. What's important to understand is that with outer planets, the sign does not create immediate events. Instead, it shapes the internal environment in which long-term change is taking place. A Pluto retrograde in Aries, for example, doesn't suddenly trigger dramatic power struggles. It slowly rewires how power, identity, and self-direction are understood. A Neptune retrograde in Aries doesn't create confusion overnight. It gradually clarifies illusions around independence, desire, or personal vision. Because outer planets move so slowly, these sign-based themes unfold over years rather than weeks or months. The sign provides the context, not the urgency. It tells us what kind of growth is happening internally, even if the results won't be visible until much later. This is why outer planet retrogrades feel subtle and abstract while they're happening. The real impact often becomes clear only when the planet eventually changes signs or completes its long-term cycle. And suddenly, the internal shifts that began quietly during retrograde make sense in hindsight. Just as zodiac signs describe how outer planet retrogrades express themselves, the houses describe where this long-term internal work is taking place. Houses represent areas of life, not events, but life arenas where experience accumulates over time. With outer planets, house activation doesn't produce sudden changes. It marks slow evolution within a specific life domain. When an outer planet retrogrades through a house, that area of life becomes an internal classroom rather than an external battleground. The focus turns inward, prompting reflection, reassessment, and gradual restructuring. You may not see immediate changes in circumstances, but your relationship to that area of life begins to shift quietly and persistently. For example, an outer planet retrograde in the first house doesn't suddenly change identity. It slowly reshapes self-perception, confidence, and personal narrative. In the fourth house, the work unfolds around emotional foundations, family conditioning, and inner security. In the seventh house, relationship dynamics are re-examined internally long before outward changes occur. In the 10th house, ideas about success, responsibility, and authority quietly evolve, even if career circumstances remain the same for a while. What's important to understand is that outer planet retrogrades work below the surface of events. The house doesn't show what will happen. It shows where awareness is being refined. Over time, this internal shift alters how choices are made, what feels sustainable, and which structures are no longer viable. Because outer planets spend years moving through a single house, their retrograde phases act like checkpoints. They revisit the same life territory repeatedly, each time deepening understanding and integration. This is why outer planet retrogrades often feel repetitive or uneventful. The change is cumulative, not dramatic. Ultimately, when outer planet retrogrades activate a house, they're not asking for action. They're asking for conscious engagement with that area of life. The visible results come later, once the internal framework has been rebuilt and the planet resumes forward motion with a clearer purpose. One of the defining qualities of outer planet retrogrades is that their impact is rarely obvious while they're happening. These cycles don't announce themselves through events or immediate emotional shifts. Instead, they work quietly, reshaping internal frameworks that take time to register consciously. Because outer planets govern belief systems, authority, identity, perception, and power, the changes they initiate unfold gradually. Awareness develops in layers. Old assumptions loosen. Internal reference points shift. You may not recognize these changes in real time because they don't interrupt daily life. They alter the lens through which life is interpreted. This is why outer planet retrogrades are often understood only in hindsight. Months or even years later, people look back and realize they think differently, respond differently, or value different things than they once did. The retrograde period was not empty, it was formative. The integration simply required time. When an outer planet turns direct, the internal work that has been developing during retrograde begins to express outwardly. Decisions feel clearer. Boundaries become firmer. Perspectives change in ways that feel natural rather than forced. What once felt uncertain or unresolved often settles into understanding, not because circumstances changed but because the internal framework did. Outer planet retrogrades teach patience with growth. They remind us that not all transformation is meant to be witnessed as it happens. Some change is meant to be lived quietly, integrated slowly, and recognized only once it has become part of who we are. To conclude, outer planet retrogrades aren't meant to disrupt your life, they're meant to reshape it over time. Their influence is subtle, internal, and cumulative, working beneath the surface long before results become visible. When we expect immediate effects, we miss the deeper purpose of these cycles. Outer planet retrogrades don't demand reaction. They invite awareness. They don't create chaos, they create evolution. And while you may not feel them happening in the moment, their impact becomes clear later, through shifts in belief, identity, power, and understanding that no longer need explanation. These retrogrades don't change what happens today. They change who you become tomorrow. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. New videos in this series are coming soon, so subscribing helps you stay up to date. Thanks for being here on Celestial Zodiac, and I'll see you in the next video.